budgeting, messaging, ad buys, and more panel to the stage. Um, Moderating the panel will be Charlie Kelly from House Majority PAC, and I invite all of you guys to come sit down. Charlie first, Kelly first.
How are you?
Hi. So Charlie will be moderating the panel, and I will leave each of them to introduce themselves and enlighten us this morning.
Terrific. Thank you. Good to be with everybody today. How is everyone? Good. Terrific. My name again is Charlie Kelly. I most recently was at House Majority PAC as the executive director. HMP, for those that aren't familiar, we're the sort of flagship House super PAC. I would say we're the air traffic controller for the progressive world, helping to sort of spend and coordinate spending for all House activities on the IE side. And I think we ended up spending ourselves, between us and our partner organization, Patriot Majority, over $100 and some million last cycle, and then coordinating a total of $225 million. So, long way of saying this panel is really interesting to me because the creative, the changes in creative, the evolution in creative, media buying, we have experts up here from every sort of type of mode, whether it's buying or digital or TV or the more traditional communications tools. And I think it really is a sort of, we're at a place right now where the things are changing every day. The study of it is super interesting to me, and I'm glad that we're here with these four individuals that can introduce themselves and go through their bios quickly as we get in the conversation. But I think, the goal here, obviously, I have questions. We'll go through maybe 40 minutes where we're discussing and talking about a number of issues, and then obviously want to open it up to Q&A for the final 20 minutes, because again, these folks are, they're on the battleground, they're on the front lines, both on the GOP and Dem side, really looking at the evolving media landscape. So with that, turn to my left and let Rob introduce himself, and we'll go down the line.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm very familiar with House Majority PAC. For 4 years, I was at the NRCC and was executive director there. And for a little more than 2 years, my partner and I have had a firm called Convergence, and we like to say that we produce content, and we produce advertising across mediums, and really try and drill down and do it specifically to the needs and goals of our individual clients.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. And going down, Julie, next.
Hey folks, I'm Julia Ager, president and founder of Sapphire Strategies. We're a digital advertising and fundraising shop on the Democratic side. Most recently, I was over at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I had been at the party committees for about 8 years before starting my firm in December. And at the DCCC, I was Chief Digital Officer, overseeing the fundraising and advertising programs, and overseeing tens of millions of advertising spend on both the persuasion and acquisition side of things. Being at the DSCC for 4 years and then the DCCC for 4 years, I really had the chance to see the evolution of digital advertising within the committees, and most recently, over the past 2 years, got to build out an in-house advertising shop at the DCCC and an in-house creative team. So I'm excited to be here today.
Terrific. Ben.
Morning, folks. Ben Engel from National Media. I've been fortunate to work with people like Rob and Joanna when they ran the NRCC, and worked with a number of committees, campaigns, PACs in my over 13 years at National Media. I'm glad to be here today.
I'm Kelly Gibson. I introduced myself earlier. I'm a partner at Hamburg Gibson Creative. I've been in sort of the business of making political media for the last 15 years, and have certainly paid a lot of attention to creative across mediums. In my capacity as co-chair of this event, I thought it would be really interesting to get a group of bipartisan creators and buyers together because there is so much unexplored territory. And I just love the idea of Rob and Julia behind two different desks last cycle, like sort of making decisions. And here we are all in the same room. So I think that's a very cool thing about this event today. So I'm excited.
Terrific. And I will say too, just on our briefing call ahead of the event today, learning from Ben, like, wow, the GOP and their buying strategy, it's a hell of a lot more efficient than ours on the Dem side. So we have things to learn from each other. But starting, I think one of the sort of baseline questions is, look, everybody here has significant background in buying or creative and the evolution there. But what are things sort of to be aware of post 2018, and as folks are looking at the 2020 cycle? Things that practitioners need to be aware of, best practices, pitfalls. And I think I'd start with Julie and Ben, just because you guys were sort of right in the middle of it, buying, whether it's digital, TV, et cetera, and going directly to best practices from 2018 and what people in this room should be aware of heading into 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, it was interesting at the DCCC, I sort of was in this hybrid role where we were doing digital advertising and creative within the committee, and then trying to help campaigns to adopt digital best practices. And one of the most critical things, one of the most important lessons I think that every campaign should be doing is just making sure that you're proactively thinking about digital creative. So many times we were sort of playing catch up, like a media firm would go out and do a shoot without thinking through, how does this fit into a 15-second ad? How does this fit into a 10-second ad or a 6-second ad? Are we getting vertical video for Snapchat, or whatever the media plan might dictate? And so I think one of the biggest lessons that we learned is just the importance of being proactive when thinking through media planning, and especially the very early stages of creative, to ensure that when you're going out and doing a shoot, you're thinking through all of the different aspects of creative and what will be needed for all of your digital, since so much more creative is needed on the digital side of things.
Yeah, I think proactive is the key word there. I've been doing political advertising since 2006, and after every campaign, there's this essentially knee-jerk reaction that the winning campaign did everything right and the losing campaign didn't. And that attribution is a very difficult thing to do in our business. We'll certainly take the credit if you want to give it to us, but we're foolish to think that the media campaign or the creative piece was the only piece that achieved a positive result for a campaign. So I see our role as learning from what we've done, learning the landscape ahead of us, and it's changing. And it changes. It's changing quicker than it ever has. And being proactive about those things, educating our clients, educating our staff, educating prospective clients on the media landscape and how we use it to our advantage. That's what I think we need to do, and that's how I think we need to.
Yeah, but digging in on that, and then follow up there, and then to Rob. But like, what is changing? I mean, we all know it, but give some specifics on. Like, obviously, digital has a growing presence.
So some of the big themes I've seen, in 2012 you had the big data theme. 2014 you had addressable and programmatic kind of came into the scene. Now OTT is here, and to me OTT is one of the ones that is the most important. Big data, everyone can have their opinion there, but I think OTT is kind of the thing. It's over the top television, so it's essentially your streaming television that younger people, everyone's starting to use more and more of. Content consumption is up. The amount of content being created is up, and the way it's being consumed is just increasingly fragmented, which makes our job increasingly more challenging.
Yeah.
How are people consuming media, and how do we reach them?
Yeah.
And it's not. In the 80s, you had three choices: ABC, NBC, and CBS. You picked one of the three. Now you've got, you could sit here and people have three choices in their pocket. So.
There's one piece I would add to this too. Especially in the calendar year 20, inventory is thinking about inventory early, and locking up inventory is going to be really, really important. In the 2016 cycle, because it was an open presidential race, television stations and networks and ownership had planned on this was going to be a huge windfall. You had 20 Republicans running, you had all this money that was going to be spent, and the one person everyone agreed couldn't win the nomination on the Republican side ended up winning it. And from a television perspective, that changed everything, because now President Trump's media plan was not television significant. He wasn't going to blow it out every week on television, all these media markets. I think in 2020, it's a completely different dynamic, because you have such a wide open field on the Democratic side. You have Democrat interest groups that are spending money even today with Tom Steyer and other groups. You've got all this money that's being pledged and released on the front end, and you have a incumbent Republican president who I think is going to change the dynamic of his campaign from 16, spend more money on television, particularly when it comes to defining his opponent or opponents. So thinking about inventory in both the digital space as well as the television space is going to be really, really critical, particularly for those of us who work on a lot of down ballot races, be it on the Senate side or a governor's side in a presidential targeted state, or even on the House race, where we're usually third in line from a resource perspective. That's going to be really, really important, even if you're just going to the television side and getting first in line for what you want, so that you kind of have the right of first refusal. Even when rates escalate, you're still there to be able to lock your time in that you want is going to be, I think, really, really important for the candidates in particular.
One follow-up just on the reservation standpoint, just sort of getting ahead of the curve on the buying. I think there's been some conversation, there was last cycle, that reserving early does not lock in inventory, which I found to be a misnomer. I think that's not true. But I'm wondering if anybody on this panel found out, whether it's digital reservations or television reservations, they ever ran into a situation with a TV station or with a digital platform that said, no, you reserved it in March, but we're not going to honor that rate. The inventory we're not going to honor, and you're going to have to pay this increased fee. Has anyone ever seen that?
I've had like a small amount of under delivery in a very competitive district last cycle, but nothing that felt disingenuous. Just needing to move around money if impression targets weren't what our sales folks thought they were.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only sort of challenge with inventory that I saw in the last cycle was not about the rates, but about the promise of the inventory itself. Like, we had some campaigns with significant make goods, which is the money they send back to you after the campaign's over for inventory slots unused. Alaska was bananas last cycle, and there was independent expenditures on both sides, and there was a big House race, and there's just not that much inventory there. So it was expensive and over required. I think, at least my experience on the digital side, is there is a significant amount of inventory that then becomes less or more desirable based on what it looks like, and the prices just change pretty significantly based on the demand.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, the relationships our buyers have are, if they tell you something, it'll end up going that way.
Yeah. Good. To Kelly, so how, in your mind, like as a media consultant, how is the creative changing, and what are things that you have to think about from the traditional television standpoint that
Sure.
may move into other
So I think
modes?
we're like a couple my firm, we do about half of our work is candidate work, and the other half of our work is ballot measure work. So we try to pass campaigns for progressive issues like education reform, or we've done marijuana legalization in a whole bunch of states. And so there is a slightly different path for persuasion when you're talking about an issue, and a less sort of structured formula about spending. So sort of going back to the amount of data that there are a lot more choices for sure, but we have a lot more information about where people are consuming information. You contrast that with what their voting habits are and what their inclination to engage in political activity, then you can create a structure of spend that is customized to each campaign. It's not like an 80-20 split.
Mm-hmm.
And the shoots are important days. It just takes a lot of gaming out. You film things differently if it's digital first or mobile first versus TV, and to sort of plan out, often you just have two cameras on set, one that is, specifically intended to pick up digital content. So we always sort of game out what we think a suite of creative needs to look like. I'm also a true believer that there is more overlap in audience between digital and TV than some people like
Sure.
to think. So I think that story needs to be tight. I don't think one thing can happen on TV just from persuasion standpoint and a different story online. I think most people are going to see both if you're doing a good job at your job. So to be really thoughtful about what that looks like. And the other thing I think is worth having a conversation about is keeping it affordable for the client, because it can be expensive to make a lot of media, especially if you're buying stuff, imagery. But that is also just all part of really good planning.
But so in that vein, though, just getting sort of like deeper in 15-second spot on the digital side. You created the 30-second ad. Are you rewriting the script for the 15-second digital piece?
I'm reordering.
Yep.
Right. So like oftentimes in a 30-second, you have the opportunity to sort of like build, deliver important stuff, and then like wrap it up. Right. With 15 seconds, you just sort of jump right into the good stuff, and hopefully you have a chance for a button or an ask or whatever it is wherever we are in the campaign. So I don't believe that it should be rewritten because I think the audience is pretty similar, and repetition is the key to sort of message penetration.
Yep.
But you do need to consider people's attention, even if it's unskippable inventory, people still space out. So.
And Rob, on your side, are you guys sort of like dramatically rewriting stuff or similar look?
Well, we shouldn't be. I mean, I think the ideal, particularly as, we're seeing more and more data that comes out every day where even people who are watching television in their living room have their iPad in their lap or their phone, they're scrolling through their phone. And ideally what you want is for your viewer, your voter, your consumer to see and hear and feel the same thing regardless of the medium they're getting it through. And if you think about like what Geico does, Geico has this phenomenal ad campaign that's gone on for years and years and years, and they have the same message, but it's delivered in different ways. It's a caveman,
Right.
it's a screaming pig in the back of a car. They have all these different kind of ways of delivering the message, which is basically 15% off for going with Geico. And I think we've struggled in the political space in approaching our advertising that way, where the digital and the creative team should be starting at the same place at the same time with the media plan in front of them to say, okay, what are we going to try and do? How are we going to try and do it? And who do we need to do it to? And doing the creative all around that's kind of central organizing plan and theme, and then delivering it. And I think we're getting better, and we're trying to get better with our firm. And I think just in the political space, it's getting better. And we've gone made some good leaps from just a few cycles ago, where the media firm would sit next to the digital firm and, all right, the 30's done, here you go. And well, what you've just crammed into a 30-second ad doesn't fit into a 15 or a 6. And then it looks all chopped up, and it's not nearly as effective as it would have been to be done from scratch the same way, with maybe a little bit more money spent on it. But I think the trade-off is usually, really, really, really worth it.
And to Ben, what's happening sort of, because I found it fascinating, like just that quick conversation we had, like about the difference in the buying strategy, because obviously the digital is becoming part of in-house, and some of the digital and the TV, those firms are coming together. But from an operational standpoint, from the buying, it's very siloed on the DEM side. What are you seeing, or what are some of the changes on the buying side that are happening?
So there's certainly silos, and then we're trying to eliminate the silos. It's a work in progress. But to me, it starts with the new, younger folks that we hire, junior staff or people we bring over that are still learning how media is bought and sold. And they are the ones that we can teach all aspects of media. We can teach them everything from print to digital, TV, and everything in between. Whereas people that have been in the industry for a longer time might have come up learning just television or just digital or whatever it is. And that's what they know, and they haven't learned how to efficiently and to properly buy the other mediums. So to me, this is a chance for us as an agency to train young people to be true media buyers. Our company's name is National Media. We're not National TV, we're not National Radio, we're National Media. So the most effective way we can build our company to be successful in future campaigns is to have talent that knows how to do all pieces of a campaign. It's a work in progress. I don't know that that's the right thing to do, but I think it is.
Well, no, it seems efficient to me. And so the thing I'm curious about, and I always like, the donors ask this, I think staff is always asking this, and I'd love to go down this sort of line on this one, but the standards for budgeting. Because, so you're like a 25-year-old campaign manager on a congressional race, and you're sort of told, okay, 75 or 80% to paid media. Well, that used to be largely television, and that's sort of, in the dinosaur age when I was doing it. But for folks today on the House level or maybe the Senate level, like what are those standards that you all are telling folks? And do they change by place on the ballot? I mean, we can get into every weed when it comes to media market and costs and efficiencies, et cetera. But from a general perspective, what are you advising and counseling clients on how to do that budgeting from a paid perspective, television, digital, mail, et cetera? And what percentage of the overall budget should these items, or should the paid be? Start with Rob.
Well, I'm going to say something maybe a little bit counterintuitive. I've always resisted the idea of a standard or a budget number in these things. And particularly in the 14 and 16 cycles when I was at the committee, you would have this debate of, all right, we're going to do 15 or 20% on digital, and that's just going to be the standard. Well, in Montana or rural Arkansas,
Yep.
really?
Yep.
And the other side of that equation is too, if you're working on a race in the LA media market, or Chicago or some of the other markets, your mix of television is going to be significantly different because for most, unless you're Michael Bloomberg, broadcast is prohibitive. So I've always, from our firm perspective and what we were doing at the committee, we wanted our consultants to drill down and have a plan for the media mix that actually fit in the construct of what the data said we needed to do to win.
Okay.
And it should be individually different for every single race, statewide, Senate, governor, because the candidates and the campaigns are unique. So to me, the media budget should be unique to what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways we've kind of, it's an easy out for folks either on the campaign side or on the vendor side to say, we're doing 20%, that's just the way it is, and we're going to blow out 1,000 points of television for 8 weeks because, that's how it's done. Of course, it's usually the TV vendor that's making that case, but I think it's important to individualize everything that you're doing.
Okay.
So I agree with Rob. I 100% agree. There's no template for how you should spend your money. Every campaign, every market is unique, and it's our job to understand those uniquenesses, if you would, in a market. I was fortunate to sit in with the media group a couple weeks ago as they were having internal discussions about how they prepare for 2020 and what they could do, and they asked me a question: why are television shares decreasing but our revenues are increasing?
They can change the cost of TV.
That's because you guys are charging us more and giving us less. But we're seeing that, and on the planning side, we have to account for that these stations have learned, since Citizens United, they've learned every cycle how to fleece us a little bit more. Apologies to the stations in the room, but you guys
And they
can
budget
charge.
for it too.
Yeah. So we have to find creative ways to help a campaign deliver their message, and sometimes it might not be as simple as buying spot TV in a market, but we ran into a situation last year where the network football spot was cheaper than buying the same spot locally in one media market. So I was able to buy the whole country cheaper than one media market.
I bet you heard about that.
Yeah.
People are like, why am I seeing this
Even-
ad
even-
in like
yeah, but even-
California?
But even though I
What
didn't
did
need
it
to reach the
mean?"
people in California, I reached the entire district that I needed to reach
For sure.
at about 2/3 of the cost
Yeah.
of. So it was a pure economics play. But
For sure. Yeah.
So those are things that we have to take into account and decisions we have to make. And if there's waste, maybe it's an earned media opportunity. So-
Like organized and efficient waste is something to
Yeah.
really sell to
Yeah.
a candidate. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Boy.
It's amazing.
So
Oh. Yeah.
But Julie, anything for you on the digital perspective of the DCCC?
Mm-hmm.
Were there best practices though, or standards because again, it took, for us, it's actually dialing back the amount of digital because a lot of the sort of donor interest is like, hey, we feel like that's the winning strategy. It's actually like on the House level, no, it should be a lot of television. The complement of digital has it increased, and that's important. But are there any best practices you learned at the committee last cycle, or things that were important from that perspective?
Yeah, I too am with Rob on this one. Like, I think that one of the biggest drivers to be looking at right away is just the efficiency of the media market and who the polls are telling you need to reach in order to win. And I strongly agree that it's not a one-size-fits-all percentage, but should be a discussion that consultants and folks on the campaign are coming together to have. And I think one of the things that's problematic is just the way that strategists think through the competitive, and the fact that there is a TV competitive and isn't a great alternative for digital means that since there's this sort of tit for tat idea of if somebody makes increases their buy on TV, we need to match it. That instinct often means that we're not thinking about the audience and what we need to do to win, but rather we're talking about the need for that, and then at some point going back to the fact that we're relying on the TV competitive to make spending decisions. So I think really thinking about the audiences that are needed to win and where we can efficiently reach those people and not relying too much on the competitive are lessons that I took away from this past cycle.
I just would add, I think that part of what my shop is really working hard on, and we do digital, we have a VP of digital and do a lot in-house and all that, we do all our creative in-house and all that kind of good stuff, is a structure for hand-holding campaigns and managers about the effectiveness and usefulness of digital persuasion. And you can get analytics. Basically everything has a higher than gold rate standard click-through rate. I mean, you sort of see it, and I like to say that's because of good creative, but it's because we target well, right? Because we're finding people who are gonna have higher than average click-through rates and higher than average completion rates. But how many times, for those of you that work with candidates, like how many times do you hear directly from the candidates, like, I haven't seen my ad online, right? And you're like, well, you're not a swing voter, right? Like, you're voting for yourself. So then we so I don't need to persuade you. And do you want to spend extra money so like you and your best friends all like see your ad, and we can do that. So then you jerry rig some sort of like random geo-targeted thing so that the candidate can see. So a lot of it is, and I've worked a lot with digital vendors and sort of the digital intellectual community about how best to talk about it and how best to describe the opaqueness and why blind trust is hard for candidates of the older ilk.
Sure.
So I think it's our job to like bring it all together and paint one lovely picture about TV and competitive and about social and about programmatic and about direct buys and all that kind of stuff.
So that to follow up on that, and I wanted to get into sort of like polling and analytics next, but you mentioned saturation, you mentioned like the difference in GRPs, or there aren't any necessarily, there's not an equivalent on the digital side. So for folks here, and I think it's really interesting because I think we've gotten to a place, they used to say 1,200 points on TV, 1,500 points like burns in the spot, you change traffic.
So many points.
Yeah.
That's so many points.
Well, but I would argue, from where I think you can go 2,000 points or more. If I close my eyes and think about the ads that I see Geico in my head, I see the guy from My Pillow, like I see some of this stuff, and I'm thinking like, man, like they just run that shit into the ground. So why from a campaign perspective aren't we doing like a slow or intense burn in? Okay, so the questions I have start with Kelly. What would you say is saturation at this point from a television perspective, and what is the equivalent on a digital perspective? Like, what do you see as the burn that replicates that television spot burn?
Right, so assuming we have like decent polling in this simulation, I think why I don't advocate for more than 1,000 points on a TV ad is because if I can help it, I'm never running TV without digital along with it, and I never don't have a suite of content that can tell the right story to the right people, right? So it's sort of, what I say is that TV is the cheapest cost per eyeball way of persuading.
Right.
But it's the highest barrier to entry in terms of budget.
Sure.
Right? So everyone thinks it's really expensive, right? But your eyeballs are cheap versus finding you online and serving you up an ad or find you on your mobile device, whatever that is. So the idea that I can sort of like blanket on television with 800 to 1,000 points and find all my swing voters and serve them lots of ads, the same thing, 10 or 15 ads in a persuasion, mobile first ads in a week. The combination, I can't tell you exactly how many points that would equal, but I think that gets you up to somewhere in the 1,500 points. The amount of times people see my persuasion.
You think 8 to 12 points over 1 week is the equivalent?
I think, so if you run 800 to 1,000 TV points a week, so the average voter sees your ad 8 to 10 times in a week, and then you marry that with digital, you really can drill down on frequency, right? So, and then you deliver your digital ad that looks and feels and has the same message 8 to 10 times. Like, theoretically, that's 2,000 points.
Yep.
Now, it's all theoretical, but we spend a lot of time studying digital behavior in a way that hopefully that plays out.
Ben?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest questions to answer in what we do is what's the right number of points to place behind a schedule. And there's a point of diminishing returns against whoever your client's target audience is. And it's our job to figure out what that is and say, okay, we think you've saturated the market for TV to reach your audience at this level, and you should move money into digital or to radio or to whatever else, or save it for another week. And it varies for every market. And when we talk about creative, you talk about Geico ads, they're clever and funny and memorable.
Yeah.
I know, some people don't really hate insurance. Like
Their current ad is highlighting their former ads.
Right.
Everyone in this room can probably remember some ad that has resonated with them their whole life. Michael Jordan's Gatorade commercial from the 90s. I love that jingle.
Yeah.
And it
I played that for my kid the other day.
Yeah, once or twice, and it stuck with me for life.
Yep.
Political ads usually aren't like that. No offense
Not a
to the
lot of
creative
jingles.
folks, but they're not a lot of jingles and not a lot of ones that stick with you longer than maybe a campaign.
Well, but so I just want
It's
to.
a good way not to answer the question.
Yeah, but folks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what we do, right?
Rob, maybe you'll answer. Maybe you'll take a shot at it. Ben avoided it. He pivoted
How
away.
many points? How many points is the right amount of points?
I'm going to pivot by answering your question with a question, or may I say it a little bit differently. It also depends on who your voters are that you're going after. So if the folks I'm trying to persuade and get to is seniors, for example, or seniors, then my television saturation or getting to a message saturation point with them is going to be easier because they watch more television. I know where they are. It's more of a linear shot. If I'm dealing with millennials, which my party doesn't do a very good job of, but if I'm dealing with millennials, my TV shot at them is radically different. And I would argue also you better be going more on digital than in the television space if you have any shot at getting to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of it is a little subjective and best guessing after everything, but I think the point she made on the front end of this was right. Ideally, you're running your creative and your persuasion over all mediums, and you're hitting them in the mailbox too, so that it's just they don't know where they're being or what they're being persuaded by.
Mm-hmm.
They're just being persuaded, and I think as everything becomes more and more kind of bifurcated, if you will, in how people are consuming things, that becomes more and more important. That you can't just do a shot on television and not have the rest of the environment around that voter or consumer being touched in a similar way.
Surround sound. That's really good. And Julie, anything like the digital, like that you would say 7 to 10 times a week?
I did a lot of, when arguing for budget last cycle, I did a lot of working to, like once our models were developed and we knew this was our target audience, we ran a program across 44 districts on the coordinated side for GeoTV, and I did a lot of sort of thinking through and helping like translate how many high quality video impressions we would do, try to get in front of our audience per week, and how much that would cost. And I think that's not the way that people traditionally are thinking about digital, but it was the way that was helpful for me to go to our executive director and say, I need this large sum of money because I want people to see 8 high quality video impressions per week online for 6 weeks, and then they're also going to see these additional 20 impressions that are display ads. And as you know, because we've been talking about it for the past 2 years, this is a lower quality impression, so it shouldn't be valued the same as this impression that we're getting through our reservation on 15-second unskippable Hulu. And so I think that it's difficult, but I think that there are ways to think about the audience and then sort of make it a little bit less apples and oranges in terms of thinking about a media plan that's going to, mobilize voters.
That's getting excitingly close to points in my mind. Do you know what I mean? That's close. I like it.
Well, yeah, we're going to crowdsource the folks in the audience. Transitioning quickly, I think we have say 10 more minutes of questions or questions here, and we'll open it up to folks in the audience. But one of the things I'm curious about is I think generally speaking, the traditional benchmark poll and doing your message survey work from that is kind of ancient. I think you have a 400 sample survey. It's 20 minutes long. You ask a bunch of questions. Some are positive, some are negative. You have undecideds that are 10% of that 400 sample. There are 40 people. You're making your message decisions based on those 40 people who are probably pretty strange because they participate in a 20-minute survey. Who can do that? So I guess a long way of entry to this question, what's the best way, or what are some nuanced ways that polling and analytics can play in paid communications, help inform the message work? What are some creative things you all are doing that you've seen that are effective? And I'd start with Rob to kick that one off.
Well, I think every poll should have media consumption questions in them. When you finally get to that level of folks having exhausted through the survey, asking them where they're getting their news, how they're paying attention to elections, I think it can be really, really informative. If you continue to ask that question throughout your polling plan in your cycle, it also gives you an idea of what you're doing from an advertising perspective, how effective it's being, if it's being efficient, and things like that. Sometimes the lines get blurred. Second, I think we've also had a tendency to silo our pollsters and our data and analytics people off and kind of keep them in separate rooms, whereas they should be sitting at the same table. And if your analytics and your modeling firm can't play nice with a pollster or vice versa, then you probably need to change consultants because they're two different types of things that you're trying to accomplish, or they're similar, but one usually doesn't do the other and vice versa. So polling is becoming more challenging. We did the Georgia 6 special election in 2017, and by the time we got into April for a June special election, we couldn't get anyone to answer the phone.
Wow.
Because they had been just pummeled in the primary. They were getting pummeled by outside groups, then they were getting pummeled by the candidates, and it became a real struggle to get data that was reflective of the district. But we started polling early, so we were able to make some educated decisions based on what we thought was going on from a baseline. So I would disagree a little bit with what you said about it's getting a little ancient. I think the significance is being shifted a little bit.
Are you growing your sample size in the collection of data, like beyond, is it say 600 or 800, or are you shortening your surveys?
I a little of both, depending on what you're trying to do. I think oversampling, if you have a good idea of what audience, what voters you really need to know the most information from, is important. Your data modeling side can be very helpful and instructive in what they need to see out of certain things. So I think you're modifying your approach to polling right now, even as every year and every cycle it's become more and more challenging for them to get completes, and your cell samples are now 40-50% kind of as a standard across the board. It's not going to get easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as online samples and online panels continue to be perfected and more utilized, that'll help shift it a little bit, I think, over time.
Kelly, anything from your side?
I think that the sort of traditional benchmark poll still gives like a good lay of the land. I don't know that it works as much for prioritizing message elements or the creation of persuasion messaging. In the past, I've really liked the combination of sort of just a traditional benchmark lay of the land partnered with some online message creative testing. We've done a lot of qualitative qual boards, and you still get the weird group of 40 people for sure, but you're delivering creative stimuli and they're writing narrative back to you about why they liked it or didn't like it, so you can glean more qualitative information about what is working and what's not working. In some races, I'll make the same ad with a white woman and a black woman, or I'll make the same cop ad, but we'll film it, one in front of a cop car and one in front of a home. And obviously these are campaigns with more significant resources for this kind of research. And then I think the third part that you have to do is you have to be running ads online, probably social, that you're slightly tweaking your creative and your imagery, and then you're just optimizing. You're trying to figure out what's working with whom and take that information and apply that to TV advertising. And that's a lot of just what visual stimuli do voters respond well to. Mm-hmm. And I agree that you need to have all the players at the table. I like to tell people I play nice in the sandbox, and I think campaign retreats are important. I think we should have more than just one a cycle, because really understanding where people's expertise lie and sharing knowledge as opposed to sort of owning it in a siloed way is useful to winning.
Mm-hmm. So last question before the audience. That you mentioned playing nice, and you all have talked about like the fact that there's so many actors in the space now. It's become cluttered. There's the IE space. There's the Steyrs and Bloombergs of the world. There's the super PAC space. And so, like, how do you, as practitioners, and going to Ben, how do you best understand what other sort of actors are doing or buying, and how do you make the recommendations to your client about like how to complement that or what to do or how to interpret it?
So the competitive machinery in our industry has really taken off in the last decade, and to a point where competitive information is shared faster than just about anything we do. I get competitive about my own buys before I get confirmation that the station even received them. So that's how fast it happens. And I'm sure every campaign and every person that receives that information is using it a little bit differently. We have our own products. I'm sure you guys have your own products on your side that you can share and sell to your clients. There's the publicly available websites where you can go and find television buys that are placed there, and every media group out there is placing different information in there, including sometimes our checks that people can go and use to buy stuff that isn't media. This world of competitive is important for a lot of reasons. It can be a way to find out what your opponents are doing. It can be a way to find out what your allies are doing and complement each other's work, or combat what's happening in the space. From the buying perspective, something that I hate that my work is all there for people to see, but it's part of what we do. But something that I've found is that it affects negotiations out of window. Whoever's in the market first essentially sets the bar.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is working from that person's bar,
Those guys.
which stinks. Because so you kind of you like the opportunity to be first to set the bar for everyone else and hopefully in favor of your candidate. But it's this amazing world where this information happens so fast and there's a load of it, and it can be used in a lot of different ways, and everyone's going to have a different answer for how they use it.
And is a standard for you, like if somebody's spending, the adversary has 1,000 points up, your partners have 5. Are there any sort of best practices that you see on meeting them in the space when it's not being
He really
outspent?
wants hard and fast answers over there.
I know
Charlie
you're
wants
looking
answers.
for that, but my personal opinion is no. Just because your opponent is spending a certain amount of money and buying 1,000 points doesn't mean that you have to necessarily match it.
Got it.
There's certainly a tendency to. It's the most. The salespeople know it's the most powerful sales tool they have. Republicans spend $1,000. Democrats are going to spend $1,001.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's the right way to do. It certainly happens, and it's certainly something we should be aware of. But we shouldn't respond just because of that. We should be planning now and have plans in place and stick to them. There's going to be variances and campaigns change, and we all get that. But we shouldn't just respond because the other side did something. One place where it worked to our advantage was in 2016. We worked with the Trump campaign the last 7 weeks of the campaign. So we were hired in mid-September to close out the campaign. We didn't have a lot of time to explain anything to them. It's just you're hired, go. But one of our recommendations was to buy network television, not just Fox News and CNN, but we ended up buying well over 30 networks broadcasting cable. So we were covering the whole country for 7 weeks, including Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. We weren't buying spot markets there. We bought them toward the end, but for 7 weeks we were buying this programming in this inventory where the breaks were filled with the Geicos and Coca-Colas and Volvos of the world, and then our ad. It wasn't cluttered with all these political ads, and it went largely undetected because the network folks aren't familiar with this competitive world that happens at the local broadcast level, and it wasn't being shared. And it wasn't until Game 7 of the World Series when our Fox rep happened to call the Hillary folks and said, Trump's got spots since Game 7, do you want some too, that they caught on. In the last week, they were scrambling to buy network inventory. So it worked in our favor that way. It won't next cycle.
Yeah.
The cat's out of the bag.
Fascinating.
I want to be proud and mad at you
Yeah.
all at the same
Yeah.
time. Bipartisan panels.
It is. And Julie,
Daniel Levin.
digital is harder to glean
Ribbon
that
Code.
information from, and it's a little murkier. So any things that you're telling folks about, other side is doing X or our campaign side is doing X, and we should at the committee do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that while I've probably used some of and I'm sure both sides have transparency tools for to scrape Facebook and Google for digital spend levels. I mean, those tools are less effective because they don't capture a huge amount of ad spend, anything that you're spending on programmatic. And so they can ultimately show you something about a campaign strategy versus how much they're spending as a full picture. And I think it's important to just have that recognition since those platforms are choosing to do so, to like do something to show Congress that they're taking action versus actually having a larger amount of transparency in the digital space across platforms. But yeah, I mean, we're certainly monitoring those transparency tools that we have on the Democratic side. Sometimes we see ads come up on those transparency tools before they go on TV, and those can clue us in to the messaging that a campaign will be putting out. And so while we're watching those, I think there's a long way to go in terms of not just the development of those tools, but in terms of how we're thinking about transparency in digital advertising generally, since right now it's all self-selected versus being mandated in any way. And so because there's a lack of education about digital advertising in general, it means that when folks see big players like Facebook and Google putting it out there, they think there's a level of transparency when it would be really easy to, as a digital buyer, go and buy ads that would never show up in any sort of transparency report.
That's good. I think we have 15 more minutes or so, so I wanted to open up to questions in the audience, and if you could just say who you are and what you represent, and then you can direct your question to anyone up here. Questions from folks here?
Hi, my name's Emily. I work for Compete Digital. This question may not be super pertinent, but it's something that keeps coming up over the course of this conversation. I understand that we want our messaging to be succinct across all platforms, but I can't reconcile the fact that there is a demand for promoted content online that looks organic, right? We posts that look like something your grandma would share, or like a Snapchat video of a candidate, perform way better in most situations, and maybe something that looks like a TV ad may get scrolled past. So how do we bring these things together? How do we recognize the importance of branding and having visuals that look similar across platforms, and then how do we also prioritize what works?
So the way my shop does it is works really closely with the campaign to build out like a messaging construct.
Okay.
So that includes like a toolkit with guidance about what we've learned from our research team and what we've learned from the landscape and all that kind of stuff, and then sort of parse out who's in charge of which product. And I think that's why, at least on the Democratic side, we often encourage campaigns to have some sort of digital staffer on the ground. But that person needs to be read in also about what we're saying and how we're saying it and where we're saying it and to whom we're saying it, so that they can be creating that sort of organic, authentic content that they're putting on social that's shot vertically, or it's a story that's shot in real time, but only putting out messaging that is mimicked and parroted in other places. So like the 15-second ad that we're filming to sort of not look like, but relate to what's happening on TV is probably going on programmatic buys, or it's probably going on direct buys, or on OTT versus social. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right. It's just everybody has to be really, what's harder and harder is keeping everybody really tight on what the message needs to be, so that there's not like one message for millennials and one message for the suburban voters and one message for the city voters and one message for the women and one message for the men, because you might as well throw all those opportunities away. That would be my response to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would add too, I mean, I think that one of the things that we did in 2018 was kind of come up with, we did some creative for GOTV that was digital first, and then ultimately ended up buying TV around it. And we did, we set up like interview guides to try to get organic content for social, because in my opinion, it's easier to take to find the right type of content for Hulu or YouTube, where people are going to be watching with sound on, so you can cut down, make a 30 and a 15 that look pretty similar, than to create the type of content that might be like thumb stopping, as Facebook would say. And so I think that trying to capture people in an more organic way can be helpful there. And we created these interview guides basically to guide the conversation so that people were talking about what we saw stick out in polling, which was jobs in the economy, like bread and butter issues, but then we were able to capture them in a more natural and emotional way over the course of an hour-long interview. And those ads performed a lot better on social, but they all reflected that underlying message. And we were able to bring in the branding that we used on the unskippable 15s and the 30s on TV so that people knew that it was one cohesive message while it looked and felt more organic. So we saw that people were watching those ads further through on social.
Well, one thing I would add too is television advertising is changing also. In this environment, if you're an incumbent, by and large, half of your state and your district may hate you already. So you're not going to put that person on every television spot week over week and reinforce a negative that they may already have. And I think this is evolving or adding to it every cycle, where the number of ads with testimonials versus the candidate, that ratio is getting way more weighted to the testimonial side. And even on the negative, it's not just that the testimonial of like, man, this is a really great guy and he can do a great job and he stands up for us and I served with him or whatever. The testimonials are evolving to the testimonial just punching somebody right in the face. Sometimes with a smile on the face, other times looking like they've just walked out of a funeral. And that type of creative in the television space, I think, is much more effective in the digital as well, because if you look at your feeds in Facebook and otherwise, it's not your traditional yelling and screaming political type ads of lots of graphics and gloom and doom and terrible music and stuff like that. It's somebody, talking to the camera about whatever the person, the product, or whatever they may be selling. And I think in this environment, that type of creative for all the different mediums is going to continue to go more in that direction and away from the typical graphic, music heavy political ads from previous cycles.
Something that we've tried, and it's a challenge in the political space because not everyone will always want to work with you or will allow your ads to run in the way you want them to, is finding some way to do sponsor branded content through traditional media sources. So in Florida last cycle, we worked on a ballot measure that was related to who had control over casinos, whether it's the state legislator or the voters who would be decide who could build a casino. And it was called Ballot Measure 3. So we worked with the football teams, the college football teams in the state, and their radio broadcasts to do sponsored segments. If a field goal brought to you by Vote Yes on 3 or whatever the creative was. But only a couple of the teams in the state would take it. The Florida Gators shot us down, and the Seminoles shot us down. But a couple of the smaller teams did work with us. So sometimes we run into those challenges where there are unique opportunities that we want to use, but we just can't.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks very much. Bradley Honan. I run a Democratic polling and analytics firm. I don't have my hands around this totally, and so I'm curious what everybody on the panel thinks of this, but whether there is a different media mix depending upon what the outcome is that you're seeking. So is television more of an effective tool for persuasion than something like Facebook, where it's maybe more of a GOTV mechanism or more of a donor solicitation channel? It feels like the scrollability of some of the social channels mean that persuasion is perhaps less effective than if somebody's, a couch potato in front of their television. Curious your thoughts on that.
Rob?
Yeah, I think that's, I think Julie mentioned it earlier that your most effective medium for persuasion is still television, but it's also your most expensive. And so you have to find the budget mix as well as the media mix to do what you're trying to do. And I think that comes back to the individual campaign candidate client that you're working with and what they're trying to accomplish, or what piece of the campaign they're trying to accomplish, particularly if you're working with an outside group where you may be focused on identifying voters who should be with you and then ultimately turning them out, and assuming that the campaign side of the equation is taking care of the candidate image and stuff like that. but I think by and large what you said is I would agree with.
I think that based on consumption of advertising, not just politically, voters, people, consumers, viewers are always sort of ready to be bombarded by something. We're just accustomed to it at this point, which I think creates this opportunity in the political space to start persuading people to vote for you from the minute you introduce yourself. It's like old school campaigning was, the beginning of the campaign was you announced and you raised some money, you saved your money, then like 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out, 10 weeks out, you persuaded, and then the last week you got people out to the polls. I don't think that structure exists anymore. And I quite frankly think that it's easier to persuade people in those last 10 weeks if you've been trying to persuade them up until that point. And now campaigns, I mean, we have congressional campaigns that are announcing now, it's like 310 days until the general election. So you have a long time to talk to voters. And once you start talking to them, you can't really stop talking to them because we're all very busy people and we all forget things a lot. So I think that all mediums work for persuasion if it's like leaving breadcrumbs for the voters until election day. Now, the heavy lift about a bunch of votes or something that they brought home to their district or the negative hits on your opponent, those narratives need a little bit more air to breathe, and so if you're building them over time, you're going to have to deliver them in their entirety at some point, and that's probably a TV message, whether it's broadcast or cable or OTT or streaming. I mean, those things are all the same things, even though the technology behind them is really different. So I'm telling all my clients, my 2020 clients, and it started in 18, was every opportunity you have to talk to a voter is a chance to persuade them, and then something else, and then get money from them, and then get their address, and then get them to sign up to knock doors, all that kind of stuff. So I sort of believe every medium is a good medium to persuade, and it's our job to navigate that over the course of many years in this case.
And I'll add to, my firm does a lot of online fundraising. Facebook is great for online fundraising. That aside, I think that like when I'm thinking of a digital media plan, I'm thinking about like efficiency versus the quality of the unit. So Hulu, for example, you buy unskippable 15-second ads. They're really expensive, and you can't target your voter file audience or your model at all. On Facebook, your quality, I think, of the unit is lower, but it's the best in terms of being able to efficiently reach your one-to-one audience. And so I think that any media plan needs to consider both the quality of the unit that you're getting and the touch on the voter, but also the fact that some of these places are like Facebook or a lot of the programmatic platforms make it easier for you to reach just people in your file. And so balancing those two things can be important when you're thinking about how to efficiently reach your voters.
It's easy to persuade a ripe voter and harder to persuade, a harder voter, which is why, at least on our side of the aisle, we have a lot of conversations about how are we expanding our electorate? Are we trying to find people that aren't registered? Are we trying to find the mushy middle? Where do those people live? Who's more affordable to get? Who's likely to turn out? And they're imperfect conversations because they're all based on theory and some analytics, obviously. But to Julia's point, if you can match one-to-one in a voter that you feel is right for your message, the lift of persuasion is much lighter.
Sir.
I'm curious, you were talking about persuadable voters and swing voters, but my impression is that the universe of these voters is shrinking dramatically and rapidly. I mean, it used to be maybe 5 to 10% outside of the base that were truly independent swing voters. And now, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about what that universe is of truly persuadable voters. It strikes me as it's actually amazingly small sliver of the electorate of likely voters.
I mean, I don't know. I don't believe anybody's truly anything anymore, quite frankly. But I agree with you that we're a polarized political landscape. It's obviously happening inside of the 24 presidential candidate field right now, the sort of push and pull between going very, very progressive democratic socialism and sort of the more moderate approach. That's a conversation we're all having all the time. There's a difference between a primary voting audience and a general election voting audience. But I think that the advantage we have now is sort of a constant rolling data thing. Like, we know what people are reading, we know what they're posting, we know where they're spending their time. And if you partner this with the kinds of candidates we're recruiting, at least on the Democratic side, it's all sort of with an eye to expand your electorate. Now, whether that's in places, purple states, where you're trying to go towards the middle. Like, I work for Kendra Horn, the congresswoman that flipped Oklahoma 5 last time. And in her case, in that district, there are a lot of truly independent voters. It's the case in Oklahoma that independent voters can vote in a Democratic primary because it's open, but the Republicans haven't allowed for the same reality. So there was this overlap and this gaming out of how to get those voters and keep them. Now, in AOC's district, are there truly independent voters? Probably not. So I think a lot of is matching audiences with candidates.
And to that point, you want to, I think you can't be defeatist about, like, yes, the sort of conventional wisdom is that it's shrinking independent voters, but I think it's important as practitioners, and you all have, I think, spoken to this, you want to go after everybody as long as it's a sort of efficient way to spend money, because, for example, we saw a lot of, in the age of Trump, I think, there's the idea or the notion that it's sort of siloed, people are hard charging on the left and they're hard charging on the right, and there's not much room in the middle. I actually would say no. If you can make a strong appeal to the right, maybe not the far right, but you can actually make inroads in a significant way. It's just that traditionally we're not having that conversation with those people. So I would say, as long as you have budget, you're not making a stupid budget decision, making investments to try to take a shot and bring some over, you're not going to bring them all, is worthwhile and worth doing to a degree.
Yeah, I think it's the setup of the election. And, I'm a little bit older than most of the folks in this room, I think, but, it used to be this kind of adage of, if you couldn't win your election based on the likely voters, then you're pretty much sunk. Like, the idea of changing the electorate was foreign to most folks. And I think President Obama's re-election campaign is the one that really turned that on its head. Because the conventional wisdom going into that race was, with all of these statistics of unemployment and all these other things, how could no president's been elected in the modern era if unemployment is over 7%, or all of these things. And on our side, he kicked our butt all over the place because he went and changed the electorate in a lot of the states that were really critical and really nationwide. And he did it by hyper-targeting and going after lower propensity voters, particularly women, particularly single women, in a lot of these states. And we, the collective we, had no idea what was going on. And that's why, one thing that always cracks me up is we continue to be surprised when we're surprised. Like, we forget, like, wow, this crazy thing happened last cycle, but nothing crazy is ever going to happen again. And, so some crazy stuff is going to happen this cycle that probably no one is thinking about or expecting right now, because it happens that way all the time. And for us in 16 at the committee, we had this daily onslaught of Donald Trump's going to lose the Republican majority, and this is a disaster for everybody. And our data never showed that, because we found these pieces of the electorate in all of these critical districts that didn't like either candidate. And so that's who we drilled down on, because our theory was they're not responding in a purely partisan way. They're not just saying the Republican's good, the Democrat's bad, or I'm for Hillary because Trump is terrible. And we cut up the electorate in a lot of different ways that way in these districts, and I think that played a part in how we were able to maintain the majority. And things like that happen every cycle with folks on both sides, at the committees and firms and everywhere else. And so I think that is where a lot of this has to be played out in 20, with persuading, segments of persuadable elected. In a lot of ways, people thought there was no really persuadable voters in 16, and yet we had dozens of counties all over the country that voted for President Obama before and flipped to President Trump. There were articles written about this again this morning. And so it's things like that that are always going to change and evolve every election cycle.
That's great. Well, so and it's now past time. Are we?
Yeah, I think what's happening in my other hat, which is co-chair,
Yeah.
I think we are taking a 10-minute break, and then lunch is someplace. Is that what's happening next?
Just right down
lunch is down the stairs. So that lunch is the next step on the agenda.
Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the
Thank you.
co-chair. Thank you to you for coming. Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice
fun.
to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Good
That was
job.
fun.